I think our speakers are going to come at this at different angles. For me, it's particularly important to relay across to the non-Muslim community the equality, or in fact sometimes the higher status of women in Islam, because nowadays, unfortunately, there's a lot of misunderstanding and misconceptions around Muslim women in particular. So I think that will be my main focus. I will look at historically and then bring it to what's happening in the present time, and then conclude with my own opinion, if I'm allowed. So Islam recognizes the indispensable nature of men and women. And the main thing is that men and women, according to Islam, are created to complement each other. They're not there to compete. And when you look at society nowadays, it's almost as though we're trying to compete in our roles. There's this area of competition between male and female. So male are like, well, why should we have to work? And we should be able to relax and do housework, all this kind of stuff. And the female are more competing for the top jobs and things like that, which is, I'm not saying any of these things are wrong, but I'm just saying that there should be a complementary way of doing this without having to compete for it. So as Muslims, we believe that men and women are created to complement each other to meet the ultimate goal, and what that goal is to please God, the Creator. So all our thoughts and our beliefs revolve around pleasing the Creator. And I've given the example here of a bicycle. A bicycle has two wheels most of the time. And if one wheel is missing, you're not going to get very far, am I right? And if you have one wheel which is larger and one which is slightly smaller, again, it's not going to be a very smooth ride. You need both wheels to be equal for a good ride. And this is how men and women are equal for a smooth ride. And I always like to talk about reference to the Quran and reference to the sayings of the Prophet, because this is where our Islamic law comes from. There's many people, in particular men, who have commented on the verses of the Quran and sayings of the Prophet. And you could give out, narrate thousands and thousands of books, but ultimately what is important are the verses of the Quran and the sayings of the Prophet. These are the two sources of Islamic law. So I'll be doing a lot of that today. The first one is a saying of the Prophet. Very simple, simply says, women are the other half of men. In the Quran it says, the believers, men and women, are helpers of one another. And now coming more onto the equality aspect. Again in the Quran, in chapter 74, verse 38, it says, every soul will be held to pledge for its deeds. And then again in chapter 3, verse 195, so their Lord accepted their prayers, saying, I will not suffer to be lost the work of any of you, whether male or female. You proceed one from another. Now remember, this was a time, pre-Islamic Arabia, a time when women were treated like animals. They were bought and sold like property. They had no rights. They weren't even regarded as a human. So when these verses came out, to us they might seem like, yeah, that's fine, we're equal. But for a woman of that time, this was a huge thing. It was a huge reform, a huge shift of thinking, to be given equality to that of a man. And there's another verse which I'm going to read for you next, and this is in chapter 33, verse 35. To emphasize this point on equality, it says, for Muslim men and women, for believing men and women, for devout men and women, for true men and women, for men and women who are patient and constant, for men and women who humble themselves, for men and women who give in charity, for men and women who fast, for men and women who guard their chastity, and for men and women who engage much in God's praise. For them has God prepared forgiveness and a great reward. Now, how much obvious can that be? Again and again. It could have simply said, for the believers, or for humankind, or for mankind. And often the verses of the Quran do say that, for Ya Ayyuhan Nas, for all mankind, or for sometimes to the believers. But here, specifically at that time, was to make the idea of equality ingrained within the people of that time until the Day of Judgment. So Muslims here are made clear about the equality aspect of men and women. And again, the last one I'll mention on this and then move on. in chapter 16, verse 97. Whoever does right, whether male or female, and is a believer, him verily we shall quicken with good life, and we shall pay them recompense according to the best of what they do. So there are many, many verses like this that talk about men and women, just to make it so obvious to the person that there's no doubt in the equality between men and women. Now, often we get asked the question about, but do you think there will be a female imam? I'm sure one of you are thinking about this as a question. I can see people nodding already. Well, I'll answer your question. So I think most of the time people look through the lens of Christianity, because that's the knowledge, or majority of people who have studied religion, they come through this thought of Christianity and Christian thinking. So then your questions are going to be Christian thought. And what I say is, actually, when you equate, for example, a minister, a priest, a bishop even, and you look at that in other religions, it's not going to be the same type of leadership. It's going to be different. So an imam traditionally was a very learned person, a person who studied the Quran, who studied hadith, who studied the Arabic language, who knew poetry, who knew, many, many sciences. Nowadays, times have changed a lot. Now, and anyone actually can lead a prayer. An imam is a person who leads a prayer. So anybody, who's Muslim, who can recite some verses of the Quran and is pious, he can be allocated and appointed as an imam. So this is not the position that we should look at when we look at leadership in Islam. If you're going to look at leadership in Islam, then the person we're looking for, the people we're looking for, are called sheikh or sheikha or murshid or murshida. And these are our Islamic scholars. They are our leaders, our spiritual guides, of whom there are thousands, male and female, across the world, even in our time and at the time of the Prophet and onwards. But because, again, I say we look at the lens through Christianity, we look at imam and we equate that to a leader. Okay, most of the time, they might be a leader, but not necessarily. So this answers the question of looking at leadership. I want to go back to the time of the Prophet. So remember in the beginning I mentioned the two sources of Islam. One is the Quran. The second one is the sayings or the actions of the Prophet. Now, during the life of the Prophet, there were many companions, male and female, all of whom would have recorded the sayings and the actions of the Prophet. At that time, the question never arose concerning the validity of learning directly from women. And in fact, Imam Hakim, a well-known Islamic scholar, has said that 1/4 of our religion depends on the narration of women. Were it not for those narrations, we would lose 1/4 of our religion. So this thinking about learning from women, this has only arose in the last few, I wouldn't say even 100 years. Before that, approximately 1500 years ago, when Islam came about, it wasn't even something that they thought about, because the believers, the companions were so staunch in their belief. When a verse was revealed of the Quran, immediately they rectified and believed in that 100%, without a doubt. So when these verses were revealed about equality, then this notion of women not having any role was out of the window from then. And the companions learned from female companions. And there's many, many examples. In fact, I've printed out a few sheets of paper there which list a lot of the female companions who were teachers and scholars of men and women. Because we don't have the time now to look at that into detail, I've listed them for you and you can look at that. And some people have written books and listed all the names and all the contribution and what they did. This is a lost knowledge. It's not your fault, it's not our fault, because people have lost this knowledge now and it's not brought to our understanding, to the fore. Another example I want to give is a female companion called Rubia bint Mawa'id. And she was a great narrator of hadith. Hadith means prophetic tradition. And she actually witnessed the Prophet performing ablution. Ablution is something we do before prayer. It's an essential part for the validity of prayer. Now, I'm giving you this example for a reason, because when she used to teach how to do the ablution, at that time, they were really great, who were considered the senior companions, like the 4 caliphs and a few others. And even they would go to her to learn. The 4 great caliphs would go to a lady, a female, and learn from her. This is at the time of the companions. And there are many examples like that. Like I said, we're short for time, so I can't give you them. And over a period of time, there was some people started to fabricate the teachings of the Prophet. And a famous Imam Dabi, he says that there are many men who have fabricated hadith. However, no woman in the history of Islam has been accused of fabrication. So basically, the intellectual integrity of either gender would be questioned, but this was a man saying it, that there isn't a single woman who has been reported to have fabricated a saying of the Prophet, whereas there were many men. So in fact, we should take more from the women. Sorry about that. And one of the holiest and most sacred places for a Muslim is the city of Medina. And here we had a lady, a very famous lady called Fatima bint Ibrahim. She was a very famous teacher of one of the hadith books called Bukhari. And when she used to come for pilgrimage, and people found out, they would travel out to go to Medina where she was. So men and women would come, and they would request her to teach in the mosque of the Prophet, where the Prophet, peace be upon him, is buried. So what greater thing than that? And she used to teach men who later on became the greatest of scholars. So here is another big example. There are many stories like this. But unfortunately, where are we today? Unfortunately, nowadays, we are debating about the position of women in Islam, to the point in UK as well, where we're having discussions, are women even allowed to enter the mosque to pray? So it's ridiculous. For me as a Muslim, a student of knowledge, this idea is just ridiculous. I just want to mention here a few more things about the teachings of the Prophet around women, and then I'll go on to the present day situation. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, was born, this is particular for those who question the position of women. The Prophet, peace be upon him, was born in the lap of a woman. He was delicately wrapped up and nursed by a woman. The first person to see his beautiful and illuminated smile was a woman. When his mother passed away, he tearfully came back to Mecca with a woman. When he returned from the cave Hira, the first person who covered him was a woman, and the first person he spoke to was a woman. A woman was the first to believe in him. A woman was the first to pray for him. A woman was the first to die for him. And when he delivered his sermon, a woman was the first to build a mimbar, a pulpit for him. When he left this world, he left resting his head on a woman. His lineage continued through a woman, and his final words were, "I give you counsel that you be good to your women." When society looked down on widows, the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, married Khadija and said she was from the 4 greatest women ever created. When society said you can't marry outside of your family or your tribe, so we're looking at the times of pre-Islamic Arabia, the Prophet married Lady Safia, who was from Jewish descent, and she became the mother of the believers. When society taught racism and made people feel ugly due to the colour of their skin, the Prophet spoke about an African woman and said, "My mother after my mother." When everyone wanted male children, the Prophet's lineage continued through his daughter Fatima. When society said that women have no worth, the Prophet said, "Paradise lies under the feet of your mother. A daughter is a means for her father to enter paradise. A wife completes half the religion of her spouse, and the best of men in religion are those who are best to their women." When culture said that women should remain uneducated and ignorant, the Prophet taught Lady Aisha and Salma, and they became the greatest of all scholars. So this is just a few examples from the life of the Prophet and how he elevated the status of women. But unfortunately, where are we nowadays? We are so far, we've come so far from the teachings of Islam, to the point where women are fighting for these rights. They're trying to fight back for the rights which Islam gave to them over 1500 years ago. But things are changing. I think there's hope. We're getting there. In 2003, just to give you an example, in 2003 there was a lot of extremism and terror attacks in Morocco in particular. And what the government did, they set up a scheme to teach women scholarship, Islamic scholarship, and these ladies are called murshidas. So they are like spiritual leaders. And since then they've set up an institute, and then they are employed by the government to be clerics. So they still exist today. And I just took a quote because when I was reading this, I thought this is amazing. So one of the ladies, she said, a murshida, a female Islamic spiritual leader, that women are the heart of the family. It is they who shape behavior. And then she says, the most important thing we do as a murshida is transmit ideas to them, i.e. to other women, so that women can become the solution to problems the men will follow. I thought that was brilliant. And nowadays, and there's also a famous artist and author in Pakistan who's written a book called Pakistan for Women. And she lists 50 Pakistani women who have broken boundaries and influenced positive change. And there are many examples. Even in UK, you'll find up and down the country many positive changes. And here, locally in Surrey, we have the Surrey Muslim Association. Some of you might have heard that. And it's a platform of mosques across the county. And our secretary and treasurer are females. The secretary is in front of you speaking right now. So, things are changing. There's different ways of leadership. So, because it's about leadership particularly. So, to answer the question, I think it's a rhetorical question, really. Obviously, women can and have renewed and brought change in religion. But I think it comes down to knowledge. For me, as a Muslim, I would say that the Muslim community themselves need to revert back to the true teachings of Islam. So come back to the teachings of the Quran and the sayings of the Prophet. And for the non-Muslim communities, for us to have greater awareness of this as well and push for that as well. So I think I'm over time now, so thank you very much for listening.